A horse-drawn carriage makes its way through a quiet forest path, bumping along the dirt road. Inside, the maid looks over at her mistress with a worried expression and asks if she's feeling all right. The noble woman doesn't sugarcoat anything, saying that since she's just been kicked out of the Duke's house, there's no way she could be fine. She looks at the maid and tells her she'd have to be pretty clueless to think this situation is okay. The maid looks down, feeling bad for bringing it up, and quietly offers an apology. But then the noble woman's tone shifts and she mentions that despite everything, it could have been a lot worse. She swings her legs casually and admits that considering what she did, she's actually lucky to just be exiled instead of being put to death. She points out that at this rate, she's basically on a one-way trip to spend the rest of her life in a convent. With a bit of a smirk, she adds that it doesn't mean she can never go back home. She looks forward with a sharp, determined smile and says that once the church is convinced she's actually sorry for what she did, that's when she'll get her chance. Chloe looks down as someone tells her she won't be able to keep that composed look on her face for much longer. It brings back a memory of Prince Rodrio losing it. Back then, he pointed at her and swore he'd find a way to trap her and finally call off their engagement. The scene shifts to the Octagon Academy during the graduation ceremony. Groups of students are walking around the grounds, talking about how the prince is finally graduating and how great it is. People are all over the place offering their congratulations as the ceremony wraps up. Say Bruno stands with the group and tells the prince he needs to start acting like a real royal and keep his head in the game from here on out. Prince Rodrio looks pretty annoyed by the lecture and snaps back that he already knows all of that. Nebel just laughs at the exchange, mentioning how reliable the prince is. In the middle of the celebration, one of them closes their eyes, thinking about the one thing that's still bothering them. Suddenly, the mood changes as a commotion starts nearby, and they wonder why everyone is making so much noise. The celebration is cut short when everyone spots the statue of the first saint covered in some kind of gross liquid. The students are in total shock, talking about how messed up it is to disrespect a national treasure like that. They're saying this is way past being a simple joke. The crowd keeps buzzing, wondering who would be stupid enough to touch the statue. They figure whoever did it basically has a death wish. Prince Rodrio stands there looking at the mess, thinking about how famous the legend of the saint is and how the person responsible is in huge trouble. Rodrio asks out loud who could have done such a thing. Right then, Chloe speaks up from behind him and says she actually has a pretty good idea who's responsible. Looking totally confident, Chloe tells everyone to just leave the whole thing to her. Chloe points her finger into the crowd, saying that only some low-class idiot from the sticks would do something so nasty. She looks Momo Palette right in the eyes and calls her out, asking if she's the one who trashed the statue. Momo completely loses it, blushing and shaking while she insists she'd never do something like that. Chloe isn't buying it for a second. She narrows her eyes and tells Momo to stop playing dumb and just admit it. Chloe points at the ground and asks what that object is lying right at the base of the statue. It turns out to be a pearl bracelet sitting in the mess, and Momo completely freezes when she realizes it's hers. Momo tries to defend herself, telling everyone that she actually lost that bracelet a few days ago. Chloe isn't having it and tells Momo to just stop with the pathetic excuses. Looking totally smug, Chloe says it makes sense since Momo is just a low-life commoner. She adds that Momo probably doesn't even get how important the saint is and tops it off by calling her a pig. Momo is left in tears, shaking and saying that Chloe is being way too mean to her. Watching the whole thing unfold, Prince Rodrio thinks to himself that this is exactly the problem. His fiancée is just a naturally wicked person. He sighs, thinking about how Chloe has been a total nightmare for as long as he can remember. He remembers how even when she was younger, she was incredibly demanding, like the time she threw a fit and ordered a new dress just because she got bored of the one she was wearing. The memories keep coming back of how self-centered she was, always complaining about everything, even yelling at the staff and demanding to see the chef because she didn't like her food. Rodrio also recalls her insane jealousy, like when she'd lose it and threaten any maid who even dared to talk to her fiancé. Rodrio keeps thinking back to how Chloe treated everyone around her, including her own staff. She'd stand by her door and shout for her butler, Shinn, demanding to know where he was. Shinn would always show up immediately, acting completely professional and asking how he could help his mistress. This was Shinn Purpleton, Chloe's personal butler who had to deal with her whims every single day. Chloe didn't care about his loyalty and would just berate him for being slow. She'd even call him a pet and tell him to stop annoying his master. Shinn would just take the insults with a smile, apologizing and explaining that he was only late because he was busy getting the specific sweets she liked. The second she saw the food, her mood would completely flip, and she'd start celebrating over the cakes like a child. Rodrio watched all of this, realizing how exhausting she was to be around. It wasn't just the help either. Even her own brother, Dark, had reached his limit with her behavior a long time ago. Rodrio looks back at the present situation, feeling disappointed because he really thought she might have grown up a bit after they graduated. But seeing her now, he realizes she's exactly the same. Chloe is still going off, talking about how a commoner like Momo never should have been allowed into their school to begin with. Momo gets all worked up and blushes, shouting back that someone named Benny always said that being a noble or a commoner shouldn't matter at all. Chloe stands there in silence for a second, looking like she can't believe what she just heard. She crosses her arms and gets defensive, demanding to know why a commoner like Momo thinks she can use a casual nickname for someone of Benny's status. Momo looks completely confused by the outburst and explains that Benny was actually the one who told her to call him that, which only makes Chloe's hand twitch with rage. Chloe finally snaps and lunges at Momo to slap her, screaming that a lowlife should learn her place and stop using names she hasn't earned the right to say. Just as she's about to land the hit, Rodrio steps in and catches Chloe's wrist midair, stopping her cold while Momo cowers behind him. Rodrio looks at Chloe with total disgust and tells her he's officially hit his limit, and there is no way he can ever accept her as his future wife or the saint. Momo looks up at him and calls him Benny, and Rodrio completely ignores Chloe to ask Momo if she's doing alright. Chloe looks like her world is falling apart and desperately asks him why he's choosing to protect a girl like Momo over her. She starts yelling that Momo is the one who messed up the saint's statue and demands to know why he's defending a criminal, while Momo tries to say she's innocent. Chloe keeps going, accusing Momo of being the reason Rodrio got a scratch on his face, but Momo starts to speak up and point out that Chloe was actually the cause of it. Rodrio takes a risk and actually tastes the liquid that was used to vandalize the statue. Chloe and Momo watch him, but Chloe looks especially shocked that he'd go that far to investigate. After tasting it, Rodrio turns to the group and asks if Momo was really the one who made the substance. He's clearly noticed something is off, and Chloe starts to look pretty worried. Rodrio thinks about how Momo's actual cooking always has a soft, gentle flavor that perfectly matches her personality. The stuff on the statue doesn't fit her style at all. Rodrio leans in and whispers a plan to Momo. She nods and says she understands, then gets her magic ready as light starts to gather around her hands. Momo casts a restoration spell, shouting the command as a bright burst of magic energy flies forward to fix the mess on the statue. Say Bruno shows up and starts clapping, telling Momo that her holy magic is as impressive as he expected. Momo is surprised to see him there. Later on, the group is relaxing with some food. Say notices the cake they're eating is from a famous shop that's a favorite among the nobility. Say gives a little laugh and mentions that he's actually a big fan of that shop too, while Momo keeps eating, still looking a bit shy. Say leans in uncomfortably close to Momo and tells her that even though the shop is famous, their cakes don't even come close to the stuff she makes herself. Rodrio has seen enough of Say's flirting and grabs him by the back of the neck to pull him away. He tells him to stop being so embarrassing, and Say just gives a half-hearted apology while getting dragged off. Rodrio points out that since Momo is such a pro at making sweets, there's no way she would have actually gone out and bought a cake like the one they're eating. Chloe takes a bite of her cake and tells him she totally agrees with that logic. Rodrio isn't finished with his breakdown yet and mentions that there's still another piece to this puzzle. Just then, Nebel jumps in behind Momo and asks if the actual culprit's fingerprints might still be on those wine bottles they found. Mentions he was listening to the whole thing from the back and it sounded like a huge headache, noting how surprised Momo must have been. He starts playfully ruffling Momo's hair, which makes her complain that he's messing it all up. Rodrio looks over and says actually has a point, but he explains that fingerprints would only identify the person who physically handled the bottles. Nearby, someone's legs are visibly shaking from the pressure. He continues his thought, saying that finding the person who touched the bottles doesn't necessarily mean they'll find the real mastermind behind the whole plot. As tension rises, a hand clenches onto some fabric in frustration. Rodrio decides it's time to settle this and orders everyone in the academy to gather up in the Great Hall. Benny steps forward and suggests they move things along so they can finally bring the person responsible for this mess to justice. Momo stands by looking pretty worried about where this is going. Benny points a finger and tells everyone to stop playing games, claiming that the evidence they need is definitely that girl's accessory. Momo loses it and yells that she's wrong. She tries to explain that the accessory was actually stolen from her, and she's been looking everywhere for it without any luck. Chloe doesn't buy Momo's story for a second and calls her completely shameless for making up excuses. She keeps the pressure on, holding up her own jewelry to make a point. She mentions there's another reason Momo's story doesn't hold water. Chloe smiles mockingly, saying that if an item is actually precious, a person would never let it leave their side. She uses the pendant she got from Binny as an example, while Momo stands nearby looking like she's about to collapse from the stress. The mood shifts when Rodrio notices the pendant. He comments on how Chloe has actually kept the gift he gave her all this time, which catches her completely off guard. Chloe gets flustered but tries to play it cool. She says of course she kept it since it was a gift from her fiancé after all. Rodrio gets real serious, his eyes shadowed as he takes that in. He tells her he wants to hear it one last time. He asks if she's willing to swear that Momo is the one who's guilty. Chloe doesn't hesitate and snaps back that she's been saying the exact same thing since the very beginning. Suddenly, a weird, high-pitched laugh echoes through the room, centered right on the accessory. Out of nowhere, Chloe's expression goes blank, and she starts spilling everything. She admits that she was the one who cooked up the whole plan just to take down that commoner girl. Reality hits her a second later, and she looks absolutely horrified. She's shaking and can't believe she just confessed to everything in front of everyone. Prince Rodrio stands his ground, mentioning how he's basically bylaid Chloe out of every mess she's ever made up until this point. Dai and Sei watch the scene play out, realizing the prince's patience has finally hit its limit. Rodrio makes it clear that he's officially done with her games. Momo looks on, completely caught off guard by the sudden shift in the prince's attitude. Chloe starts to freak out, clutching her chest and demanding to know what's going on. She's looking totally rattled as the situation spirals out of her control. Rodrio doesn't flinch and tells her he's sorry, but he actually messed with her pendant before all of this. The realization starts to sink in for everyone else in the room. Momo is standing there in total silence, barely able to process what the prince just revealed. Rodrio shows off the jewelry, explaining that the pendant is fitted with a magic stone that records sound. It turns out the laugh everyone heard was actually the device playing back her own voice. Chloe's face goes pale as she starts sweating. She can't believe she fell for such a trap and just keeps telling herself there's no way this is real. Rodrio leans in with a smirk, mocking her by saying that if she's really as innocent as she claims, she shouldn't have anything to worry about. He tells her that they're going to listen to the rest of the recording right now, and then everyone will know exactly what happened. The recording keeps playing, and the whole room hears Chloe's voice talking trash about how conceited Momo is. Another voice on the recording chimes in to agree with her, making it obvious she was plotting behind the scenes. The magic recording continues to play Chloe's private thoughts for the whole room to hear. In the recording, she complains about how Binny is about to graduate but is still totally hung up on that country girl. The audio then captures a conversation where someone asks Chloe if she really hates being the prince's fiancée that much. Chloe's recorded voice doesn't hesitate, saying that she obviously hates the arrangement. The recording takes a darker turn as Chloe starts plotting. She wonders aloud what would happen if Momo ended up committing some kind of massive, unforgivable crime. She keeps going with her hypothetical plan, acting like she's just coming up with an example of how to ruin someone. Chloe lays out the whole scheme on the tape, suggesting they desecrate the statue of the first saint and plant one of Momo's personal belongings at the scene to frame her. Hearing her own voice expose the entire plot is too much for Chloe, and she completely loses it, falling to her knees and screaming in the middle of the room. Rodrio looks down at her and says that this is the actual truth of the situation. He calls her out for refusing to admit what she did and trying to pin her crime on an innocent person, adding that she's brought nothing but shame to the royal family. As Chloe remains collapsed on the floor, Rodrio makes it clear that there's no way she's getting forgiven for any of this. Moving on, the authorities realize they can't leave the provisional saint title as it is. They decide the only fair way forward is to redo the entire saint selection process between Momo and Chloe from the beginning. Chloe starts losing it, panicking and yelling at Binny that the accusations aren't true. She tries to turn the tables, claiming that Momo is actually the one trying to steal everything away from her. Binny isn't having any of it and tells her to get her hands off him. He makes it clear that the only person he allows to call him by his nickname is the one he actually loves. Binny turns his back on Chloe and tells Momo it's time for them to get out of there. Momo follows him, leaving Chloe behind in the dust. Chloe looks completely destroyed, her eyes going hollow as she finally realizes she's lost everything. She can only manage a quiet word of acknowledgement. The history of the kingdom explains that every few decades, things get bad when miasma and monsters flood the land. The only way to fix it is through a saint, someone with the power to purify the whole mess on their own. But turns out, they couldn't find anyone who actually fit the bill for a long time. Since they couldn't find a natural saint, they decided to pick a promising girl and train her for the role, and that's how Chloe got chosen in the first place. But now, everything has changed. Because of what she did, Chloe is officially stripped of her title as the provisional saint, and her engagement to the prince is being reviewed. To top it off, she's being shipped out to a nunnery in the Nansonia region. It's basically the most brutal reform school for noble girls out there. The only way she gets to come back to the capital and keep her engagement is if she actually reforms her personality. Benny thinks about how Chloe usually acts and figures there's zero chance she'll ever change. Benny decides they need to be extra careful to make sure Chloe can't wiggle out of this. To keep her under a microscope, they give the people monitoring her special brooches that have the same tracking functions as Chloe's own pendant. These aren't just for location tracking though. The devices use magic to record full video of everything she does. The plan is to use this non-stop surveillance to finally catch her acting out and expose who she really is. The stakes are high because if she doesn't show any real improvement after a month of being watched, her engagement to the prince is officially getting trashed. It doesn't help that the group assigned to watch her, including her brother Dark and Say, already can't stand her. Benny thinks the whole setup is perfect for them. Since they're the ones judging her, all they have to do is keep saying she hasn't changed, and she'll lose everything. He starts getting a bit dark with it, thinking about how much he's going to enjoy watching her life fall apart as a lesson to everyone else. Moving on, the carriage ride to her exile begins. Shinn looks over and asks Chloe how she's feeling. Chloe doesn't even try to hide her mood and tells him straight up that she feels like total garbage. Shinn looks down, looking pretty bummed out as he apologizes for how things turned out. Chloe just leans back and tells him not to worry about it. She mentions that since the monastery is supposed to be a rough place, she's just going to have to put in the effort. Shinn looks at her like he can't believe his ears. He tells her he's actually surprised because he really didn't think she'd be able to take being treated like this. Chloe closes her eyes and agrees with him, realizing he's not wrong about how she used to be. She keeps going, admitting that if this had happened to her in the past, she probably would have just run away instead of facing it. Looking out the window, Chloe asks Shinn if he's actually miserable having to follow her. She points out that staying at the palace would have been way more comfortable than heading into the middle of nowhere. Shinn stays quiet for a second before telling her he's fine with it. He lets her know that he made up his mind a long time ago to serve her no matter what. Chloe just smiles softly at his loyalty and says she understands. She gets a bit more personal, telling Shinn she's sorry for forcing him into such a crappy situation, and then she looks him right in the face and thanks him. Shinn is completely stunned by the sudden show of gratitude and just sits there frozen. Meanwhile, the guys monitoring the magic recording are looking at the screen, totally confused by Chloe's sudden change in personality. Watching the magic recording, Dark is losing it. He can't wrap his head around the fact that Chloe actually apologized, especially since he sees her as a spoiled girl who usually just blames everyone else for her problem. He keeps watching her, noting that hearing her say thank you is a total first. It's a side of her he has literally never seen before. Dark stares at the screen, looking pretty intense. He wonders to himself if she's even capable of making a genuine expression like that when she smiles. Back in the carriage, Chloe notices Shinn is just staring at her blankly. She asks him what's up, but Shinn is so thrown off by her nice attitude that he asks if she's running a fever. Chloe just starts laughing at his reaction. She playfully tells him he's being rude for thinking she's sick just because she was being kind for once. Watching this play out, Dark grits his teeth. He's convinced she's just acting like a good girl because it's the first day of her exile, and he tells himself he's not going to fall for it. He looks down, his expression turning cold. He thinks to himself that a girl like her doesn't have any kind of future left. As he watches her soft smile through the crystal ball, he gets even more suspicious. He wonders what her real deal is and decides he's not going to let her get away with whatever she's planning. Dark thinks back to how Chloe used to be, always arrogant and looking down on everyone around her. He can't figure out why she's suddenly acting so humble and sweet now. He reaches out toward the glowing image of her, feeling like something is definitely not right. Even though she looks peaceful, he's still on edge about this personality change. Rodrio watches the crystal ball and mentions that seeing Chloe act so calm is actually kind of annoying since it messes with his expectation. He and Dark are still keeping a close eye on her every move. Rodrio wonders out loud if she's just faking this new personality to get sympathy. He's not buying the nice girl routine at all. Dark stares intensely at the recording, thinking that whatever she's trying to do is a waste of time. In his head, he's convinced that even if she pretends to be a better person now, it doesn't make up for the past. He keeps looking at her with a cold expression. He's certain that she has no future back in the royal capital, no matter how much she tries to act like she's changed. The scene shifts to a flashback of the official meeting held right before Chloe was kicked out. The council members are seen making the final call to strip her of her saint candidate title and send her off to a monastery. One of the higher-ups in the room tells the prime minister that the plan is set and they're moving forward with the exile. Chloe's father, Brachia, looks absolutely crushed. He apologizes to the group for all the trouble his daughter caused and even offers to give up his noble title because he feels so responsible for her mess. Brachia lets out a long, exhausted sigh while looking at the ground. As the Prime Minister, the weight of the scandal is clearly hitting him hard. Someone at the table tells him not to be so hard on himself. Brachia just bows his head and thanks them, but he still looks like he's carrying the weight of the world. Say Bruno watches the whole thing go down from the side. Meanwhile, someone mentions that luckily, they've managed to reach a conclusion on the matter. The council meeting continues with the news that the Holy Church is willing to play down the whole incident. Instead of a major scandal, they're going to treat Chloe's harassment of Momo Palette as nothing more than a simple spat between fellow students. Rodrio looks over the documents and points out that there was actually a specific request sent over from the other side regarding how to handle the fallout. The details of the proposal are laid out. The engagement between Prince Rodrio and Chloe will be officially scrapped. In her place, Brachia is supposed to adopt Momo so that she can become the new candidate to marry the prince. Rodrio stands up so fast he knocks his chair back, clearly surprised as he asks if that's really what they're proposing. He starts running the math in his head and realizes this is a win-win situation. By cutting Chloe loose, the Prime Minister avoids a massive scandal. Rodrio finally gets rid of his selfish fiancée, and he finally gets a clear path to be with Momo. Rodrio is looking pretty thrilled about the whole thing, thinking to himself that this is basically a dream come true. Someone in the room mentions that the Prime Minister should be more than happy to agree to this since it solves all his problems. But Brachia doesn't look happy at all. He wears a serious expression and apologizes to the group, asking them to give him some time and hold off on that specific plan for now. Rodrio loses it and is completely shocked by the hesitation. He blurts out, asking why on earth Brachia would need time to think about such a good offer. Rodrio looks at Brachia with a mix of frustration and suspicion. He asks if the real reason Brachia is stalling is because he refuses to accept Momo just because she has a commoner background. Rodrio doesn't buy the hesitation for a second and claims that Brachia is just a discriminator at heart, exactly like Chloe. Brachia keeps his cool and shuts that idea down immediately, telling the prince that's not what this is about. He explains that for a noble woman, being sent away to a convent is essentially the end of her life. It leaves a permanent stain on her record and basically guarantees she'll never be able to get married. Brachia points out that Chloe has actually put in a lot of effort as a saint candidate up to this point. He says it seems way too cruel to exile her forever without giving her even one chance to fix her reputation. Rodrio is leaning back and looking pretty annoyed by the whole thing. He asks Brachia if he's really just asking for mercy because she's his daughter, calling the whole request pretty arrogant. Brachia doesn't back down and says he is definitely planning to put some strict conditions on the table for this to work. He holds up a finger to make his point and says he only needs a single month for this trial period. The stakes are officially set. Brachia declares that if Chloe doesn't show real signs of changing her ways within that month, he will personally kick her out and disown her from the Duke's family for good. Rodrio is visibly shaken by how far Brachia is willing to go, and he can't believe what he's hearing. The prince thinks about Chloe's reputation as a total tyrant. He's convinced there is absolutely no way a person like her is going to turn things around in just 30 days. Brachia looks down at his papers, wondering what's actually going through the prince's head right now. Rodrio speaks up and asks how they're even supposed to determine if Chloe has actually turned over a new leaf. He mentions that while it might be possible at the convent, there's no way to verify her behavior while she's traveling there. Brachia stays calm and says he has a specific proposal to handle that exact problem. He looks directly at the prince and tells Rodrio that he should be the one to personally judge Chloe's conduct during this time. The suggestion catches Rodrio completely off guard, and he can't believe what he's hearing. Rodrio is visibly flustered and asks if the Duke really expects him to follow Chloe around and watch her 24/7. He gets worked up and yells that he absolutely hates that idea. Brachia clarifies that the prince won't have to do anything that extreme, suggesting they just have her wear a brooch with projection magic on it instead. He explains that with the magic item, keeping an eye on her from a distance will be incredibly easy. Brachia looks Rodrio right in the eye and lays it out for him, saying that basically, whether Chloe lives or dies is now entirely in the prince's hands. The weight of the situation hits Rodrio hard, and he starts overthinking what might happen if he refuses to acknowledge any progress she makes just to ensure their engagement stays cancelled. Brachia starts talking about the past, explaining how he raised Chloe specifically to be the prince's wife, and how she worked through saint training since she was a kid without ever complaining. He goes on to say that because of all that training, she should be able to bounce back from this mess. But then he mentions what happens if she fails to turn things around. With a calm smile, Brachia tells Rodrio that if she can't win the prince over, she's no longer his daughter because he has no use for someone who's that useless. Rodrio looks at the Duke with suspicion, thinking it's crazy how cold the guy is being toward his own kid, and he starts wondering if there's some hidden motive behind all this. Rodrio finally gives in with a heavy sigh and tells Brachia that since he's putting it like that, he'll agree to the surveillance plan. Even though he's agreed to watch her, Rodrio makes a mental note that he has no intention of ever actually believing she's changed for the better. And so the monitoring begins, with Rodrio, Dark, and Say all gathered around the magic tool to keep tabs on Chloe, though Rodrio is mostly just waiting for her to show her true colors. As they watch her through the projection, Rodrio is convinced that it's only a matter of time before she makes a mistake and proves him right. Rodrio keeps a close eye on the projection, waiting for Chloe to mess up. The narration points out that even the people right next to her are probably just waiting for the perfect moment to see her fail, while Chloe herself looks deep in thought. Inside the carriage, the mood is a bit lighter as Chloe smiles and calls out to Shinn. As the carriage rolls along the path, Chloe asks Shinn if he still remembers the day they first met. Shinn looks back at her, a bit surprised by the random trip down memory lane, and asks why she's bringing it up so suddenly. Chloe gives him a soft smile and tells him there is absolutely no way she could ever forget that day. She thinks back to the debt she owes him and everything he's done for her, and the scene shifts to a memory of a rundown street. The flashback shows a young Chloe sitting all alone on a curb in a rough part of town, surrounded by broken windows and passing strangers. In the memory, the young Chloe is covered in bruises and dirt when someone suddenly calls out to her. Young Chloe looks up and asks the boy if he's all alone, and a young Shinn, looking just as scruffy as she is, asks why that matters. Shinn, his face marked with bruises, asks her what business a noble girl could possibly have with a kid living in the slums. Chloe looks down at the boy and tells him she's just there to kill some time. She mentions how pitiful it is for someone to have to live in a place that smells like literal trash. She reaches out a hand and tells him she's decided to take him in. She says he should be pretty happy about his luck. Later, the boy is sitting on a stool in a much nicer room, but he looks completely uncomfortable with the change. He can't seem to settle down or get used to the fancy surroundings. Chloe walks into the room with a maid and notices him. She tells him he actually looks pretty decent now that he's cleaned up and wearing proper clothes. The boy starts to thank her but stops, so Chloe asks him what his name is. He tells her he doesn't know. He explains that he's never had anyone call him by a name before. Chloe takes a second to process the fact that he doesn't even have a name of his own. She decides she'll be the one to name him and tells him that from this day forward his name is Shinn. The boy repeats the name Shinn as it sinks in. Chloe gives him a sharp smile and explains that she's giving him that name because it belonged to a small bird of hers that died recently. Chloe points a finger at the boy and gives him a sharp smile. She tells him that since she was the one who found him, he's officially her pet now. Looking back on that moment, Shinn remembers how he used to think she was honestly the most terrible person he had ever met. He reflects on how Chloe was the perfect example of a typical noble, acting exactly as someone of her status would be expected to. She used to brag about her good deed of rescuing an orphan like it was a massive achievement. In her eyes, she was the hero of the story, and she made sure everyone knew she was the one who saved him. Whenever she got in trouble for being late, she'd just shift the blame onto Shinn, claiming he was the one wasting time. She didn't really treat him like a pet. It was more like he was a low-level servant who had to deal with her whims, even being told to sleep on the floor. Chloe mentions that there's no way she could ever forget those days. Meanwhile, Shinn thinks to himself about how he's totally over her attitude. Back in the present, Chloe looks a bit awkward as she tries to find the right words to say. She ends up just giving a shy, embarrassed laugh while her face turns bright red. The maid clears her throat to break the tension and apologizes for the interruption. She suggests it's probably time they find a place to stay and get some dinner. Chloe immediately asks where the best inn in the area is. The maid is caught off guard by the request, since they probably don't have the budget for the fancy lifestyle Chloe is used to. Chloe surprises everyone by saying that she doesn't mind staying somewhere cheap. Shinn can't believe his ears and asks her if she's really serious about staying in a low-budget place. Chloe tells him that even a thin, cheap mattress would be plenty for her. Shinn just looks at her with total confusion, never having heard her talk like this before. She quickly brushes off his confusion and points toward an inn nearby, telling him they should just head over there. Shinn is left standing there looking completely dazed by how much she's changed. Later, the two of them sit down for a meal at a local spot. As Chloe starts eating, she tells Shinn that the food is actually really good. Shinn stops eating and looks at her, totally stunned. He reminds her that she used to be incredibly picky and asks if there wasn't a long list of foods she hated. Chloe just shrugs it off, saying she doesn't have any allergies so everything is fine. She looks genuinely happy, laughing about how wonderful it is to find such a great shop with tasty food in the castle town. Watching her act so out of character, Dark asks who this woman is supposed to be. Shinn just looks drained as he replies that technically it's still Chloe. Rodrio watches Chloe from afar, totally confused by what he's seeing. He can't wrap his head around the fact that the girl he knows is actually enjoying commoner food. He remembers how Chloe used to act, imagining her throwing a fit and screaming about how the food they served her was basically animal feed and an insult to her status as a duke's daughter. Say Bruno watches as well, wondering out loud if maybe Chloe is actually reflecting on her past mistakes and trying to change. Dark shuts that idea down immediately. He tells the group there's no way she's changed and that she's definitely just putting on an act to survive the current situation. He warns everyone not to be fooled by his sister. He's convinced that Chloe reforming is a total impossibility, comparing the idea to the world turning upside down. Rodrio listens and nods along, thinking that if her own brother is that certain about her being fake, then it must be the truth. Dark stays quiet but grips his clothes so hard his knuckles go white, clearly still holding onto a lot of anger toward her. Moving on, the next few days go by without any drama. However, the peace doesn't last, and a new problem starts brewing while they're traveling through the forest near the monastery. While taking a break, Chloe looks around at their surroundings. She points out how they've ended up pretty deep in the woods. The maid consults the map and lets Chloe know they're on track. She estimates they'll finally arrive at the Nansonia Monastery in about a week. Chloe looks a bit down as she mentions that since they're getting close to their destination, it's almost time for her and Shinn to part ways. She pauses for a second, clearly having something heavy on her mind that she needs to get out. With her back turned to him, Chloe admits she's been pretty terrible to him over the years, but she tells him she's actually really thankful for everything. Shinn is caught completely off guard by this, looking totally shocked that she's saying something so sincere. Chloe thinks back to when she was a kid, remembering how her dad was always too busy to pay attention to her and how she never got along with her brother. She realizes she was always lonely back then, so having Shinn stick by her side actually made her really happy. She continues by saying she knows he probably hated being forced to come all the way out into the middle of the woods like this. Looking genuinely regretful, Chloe tells Shinn she's sorry for being such a difficult person to deal with. Shinn looks stunned that she's actually apologizing and tells her he doesn't feel like he deserves to hear those kinds of words from her. Chloe brushes it off with a smile while taking a drink, pointing out that the monastery doesn't even allow men and she's already been kicked out of her family home. She tells him there's really no reason for him to keep following her after this. Chloe sits in the grass and explains that she's telling him all this now because they've reached the end of the line. Shinn is confused by her saying it's the end and points out that if she just shows some regret for what she did, she should be able to go back to the capital. Chloe just twirls her hair with a sad smile and tells him that going back probably isn't an option for her. She explains that even if the church lets her off the hook, her father and brother will never forgive her for the shame she brought upon the royal family and the Duke's house. She figures her family is actually happy to see her ruined and that they're probably enjoying her downfall. Chloe even laughs a bit, imagining them mocking her and saying she finally got what she deserved. Because of all that, she tells Shinn he doesn't have to stay and that he's free to head back to the capital whenever he gets tired of dealing with her. Shinn gets a bit annoyed and tells her he's not going anywhere until she's safely at the monastery, asking why she's so intent on pushing him away. Just then, a loud rustling noise comes from the nearby bushes, making both of them stop and look over to see what's coming. Chloe watches the trees with a small smile, seemingly resigned to whatever is about to happen next. Chloe looks at Shinn with a sad smile and tells him that at the very least, she wants him to stay by her side for now. Shinn looks back at her with a serious expression and gives her his word that he'll stay. The moment is interrupted as Shinn senses something in the woods. He draws his sword and moves in front of Chloe, telling her he'll protect her even if it costs him his life. A group of hooded men steps out from the trees. One of them calls out to the young ladies, commenting on how they look like they come from wealthy families. The bandits walk closer with creepy grins on their faces. One of them says they're hurting for money and asks if Chloe and Shinn can do them a favor by handing some over. Shinn realizes they've run into actual bandits, but Chloe doesn't seem very intimidated. She just thinks the whole situation is a total cliché shakedown. The leader of the group tells his men to keep their hands off the women for a second. He says they've got some fun planned for them once they're done with the robbery, and his guys agree. Chloe gives them a look of pure disgust and tells the group she'd never hand her body over to people like them. One of the bandits loses his temper immediately, getting right in her face and asking her what she just said to him. Shinn doesn't give them a chance to get any closer. He holds his sword ready and tells Chloe to get behind him while he handles it. Chloe doesn't waste any time and attacks the bandit, telling him he's being way too noisy. She follows up by planting her boot right into his face, completely leveling him. With the threat neutralized, Chloe stands there holding a handheld crossbow. She looks totally bored by the whole thing and tells the maid it really wasn't a big deal. The maid is staring at her in shock. She asks Chloe why she's even carrying around a weapon like that in the first place. Chloe looks back calmly and says it's just for self-defense. She explains that she's always had a habit of making enemies, whether it was during her time as a saint or back when she was engaged to the prince. While she's loading her crossbow, she mentions that since she never knew when she might get jumped, she put in the work and trained in secret even though it was a total pain. Chloe smiles and admits she never actually thought those skills would end up being useful in a random forest like this. The maid just looks at her, feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything her lady has been through. Moving on, the two of them continue their trek through the woods with their luggage. Chloe can't help but comment on how weird it is that they actually ran into bandits in a place like this. Chloe notices something in the distance and makes a small sound as she realizes where they are. She turns to Shinn and asks him if they've reached the area around Mount Iris. Shinn confirms that she's right about their current location. Chloe takes a second to process that and says she understands the situation now. She reaches out and asks to borrow the map for a moment, and the maid quickly hands it over. Looking over the map, Chloe points out that if they want to get to the Nansonia region, they shouldn't bother going through the town from here. She traces a finger over the terrain and says it would be much faster to head straight through the dungeon, so she decides that's the route they're taking. The maid is completely caught off guard by the idea and lets out a shocked shout. The maid starts to panic, begging Chloe to wait and asking if she's seriously thinking about actually going inside a dungeon. Chloe looks back with a totally flat expression and asks her what the problem is even if they do. The maid starts freaking out, pointing out that the place they're heading into is strictly for high-level experts. She tells Chloe that with the basic gear they're carrying right now, they won't stand a chance. Chloe doesn't seem bothered at all while she brushes off her clothes, telling the maid she's already well aware of the danger. She just tells her to stop worrying and keep up. As their carriage rolls along, Chloe clarifies that her actual goal isn't the dungeon itself. It turns out she's looking for the specific inn where all the local adventurers hang out and stay. She looks out the carriage window and mentions that she's planning to settle down and stay at that inn for a good while. The maid looks totally confused by this plan and repeats the idea of staying there for a while back to her. The maid tries to talk some sense into her, reminding Chloe that her whole mission is to head to the Nansonia monastery to prove she's actually reformed. She asks if Chloe really thinks she has the time to be wasting like this. Chloe stays perfectly calm and simply tells the maid that she knows exactly what her situation is. She explains that while she was only given 1 month for this whole ordeal, nobody ever explicitly stated that she had to spend every single second of that month stuck inside the monastery walls. Looking back out the window, Chloe says that it really doesn't make a difference how she chooses to spend the time leading up to her deadline. With a pretty suspicious smile, Chloe adds that the final result is going to be exactly the same regardless of what she does now. Chloe tells Shinn that she's come to a decision on how they're going to handle things. She looks pretty pumped as she explains that she's going to pretend to be a regular traveler from here on out. She tells Shinn he better play along with the act to make it believable. The plan hits Shinn out of nowhere, and he looks completely stunned by the idea. He tries to get her to wait a second, calling her my lady in a panic as she starts moving. In the next scene, they've made it to the inn. A waitress greets them with a smile and asks how many people are in their group. Shinn and Chloe are both wearing hooded cloaks to hide their faces. Shinn tells the waitress there are 2 of them and apologizes for the sudden arrival. The waitress gets worried the second she sees them, asking what happened because they look like they've been through a rough time. Chloe immediately jumps into her role, acting distressed while she explains that they were just attacked by bandits. She tells the waitress the thieves took everything they had. The waitress looks at them with a lot of pity and says that sounds like a total disaster. Keeping the act going, Chloe pretends to be shaken up and says it was her first time ever dealing with something so scary. She adds that she only barely managed to escape with her life. While Chloe keeps up the act, Shinn is standing there thinking about what a huge liar she is. He remembers how she was the one who actually beat the crap out of those bandits and stole their clothes, making her way more of a criminal than the guys who attacked them. Chloe doesn't miss a beat and continues her sob story. She tells the waitress that since they lost everything to the thieves, they don't have any food or a place to stay, and they're basically stranded. The waitress takes a second to look at them, seeming to process the whole situation. She says she understands what they're going through. The waitress decides to be a hero and tells them she can look after them at her place for a while. Chloe acts totally surprised and asks if she's really being serious about helping them out. Chloe thanks her a ton, looking relieved that the plan is working. The waitress just smiles and tells her she should relax and make herself at home. The waitress tells them to follow her so she can show them around. Chloe is all for it and happily agrees to go with her. As they start moving, the waitress gets a curious look on her face. She prefaces her next thought by saying there's something else she's wondering about. While they're walking, the waitress suddenly asks if the 2 of them are actually eloping. The question catches Chloe completely off guard. Chloe's face turns bright red and she starts losing it. She stammers that they definitely aren't eloping and that it's nothing like that at all. To shut down the romance rumors immediately, Chloe points right at Shinn. She tells the waitress that he's actually her brother, while Shinn just stands there in the background looking pretty done with the whole situation. The waitress laughs and says she knew that's what was going on. Chloe and Shinn both start coughing from the awkwardness of the lie, but Chloe manages to play along and confirms it. The waitress gets a bit more serious as she thinks about their situation. She mentions how unusual it is for just two siblings to be out in a deep mountain dungeon all by themselves. Taking a closer look at them, the waitress points out that they definitely look like they come from a noble background. She asks them straight up if something happened to land them in this mess. Chloe starts acting the part, clutching her cloak like she's distressed. She tells the waitress that there is actually a story behind why they are there. Looking down like she's heartbroken, Chloe tells a total lie about her relatives tricking her and kicking her out of her home just the other day. She keeps the act going by saying she was planning on leaving the house all by herself. She glances at Shinn with a fake smile and says her brother was the one who insisted on coming along to protect her. Shinn is internally losing it while listening to this. He thinks about how she's shamelessly blaming other people when the exile was actually her own fault, and he can't believe the random lies she's spinning. The waitress falls for it completely and gets fired up. She says it's horrible for parents to just throw a young girl out into the mountains like that. She turns her attention to Shinn and gives him a big pat on the back. She tells him he's actually a really impressive guy for staying by his sister's side through all of that. The waitress finishes by saying what a great big brother he is. Chloe just giggles to herself, clearly enjoying how well her plan to manipulate the waitress is working. The waitress suddenly remembers something and tells Chloe and Shinn that she forgot to mention they don't actually have any vacant rooms left at the moment. Since they told her they're siblings, she asks if they'd be alright just sharing a single room. Shinn completely loses his cool and starts blushing, totally thrown off by the suggestion. Chloe doesn't miss a beat and cheerfully tells the waitress that it's totally fine, thanking her for the help. Shinn just looks at her, still reeling from how easily she's rolling with this. The waitress hands over the room key, apologizing for the room being a bit small but telling them to make themselves at home. Chloe happily accepts it. Realizing they haven't properly introduced themselves, Chloe pauses for a second to come up with a cover. She tells the waitress she's sorry for being so late with the introductions. With a sweet, innocent smile, Chloe introduces herself using the fake name Choco Brown to keep her identity hidden. Shinn follows her lead, looking pretty drained by all the lying. He just gives his name as Shinn without adding anything else. The waitress smiles and says it's nice to meet Choco and Shinn, fully buying into their fake sibling act. Just then, someone from another part of the inn calls out for the proprietress. She shouts back that she's on her way and heads off to handle the other customers. Later, once they've settled into their small room, Shinn gets serious. He asks Chloe if she's really okay with the two of them sharing a room like this, but Chloe just looks at him and asks why that would even be an issue. Shinn is definitely not okay with the situation and tells Chloe that this is a huge deal. He reminds her that even if they're lying about being siblings, they're still just an unmarried man and woman. He gets all worked up thinking about the fact that they're going to be eating and sleeping in the same room. Chloe just turns around and looks at him, simply saying his name as she watches him freak out. She starts teasing him immediately, acting all playful and calling him a pervert for having those kinds of thoughts. Shinn just stands there looking completely done with her. Shinn loses it and yells at her, telling her to please stop making fun of him. Chloe just laughs it off, telling him that he's actually really adorable when he gets like this. Shinn sighs, looking pretty defeated. He tells her that since he's her servant, he'll do whatever she wants, but he reminds her one last time that he is still a man. Chloe gives him a little smile and apologizes for teasing, thanking him for being so reliable. She even reaches out to pat his head like he's a kid. Chloe's mood shifts for a second and she looks away, saying she really wishes she had a real older brother like him. Shinn is totally confused and asks her what she just said. She quickly brushes it off and tells him it was nothing, but as she says it, she tightly grips the bedsheets. Chloe decides to call it a night since she's exhausted, telling Shinn they should get some sleep. Shinn just gives a simple nod and agrees. The next morning, Chloe wakes up feeling refreshed. She stretches her arms out and talks about how great of a sleep she had. Shinn is right there waiting and mentions that she definitely slept soundly. He accidentally slips up and calls her lady again, but then they both notice someone watching them from the side. Chloe gives him a sharp look and tells him he needs to stop with the formal titles. She reminds him that as far as anyone else is concerned, they're supposed to be siblings. Shinn realizes he messed up and quickly apologizes. He tries to fix it by using her nickname Choco to keep their cover. Later, while the two of them are sitting by a well, Chloe is still acting a bit annoyed. Just then, they hear a kid's voice shouting for their attention. A little village girl jumps out with a huge look of excitement on her face. She looks right at Chloe and asks if she's actually a real-life princess. The question catches both of them completely off guard. They just stare at the kid, totally shocked that they've been put on the spot like this so easily. The girl explains her logic, saying she clearly heard the big brother calling Chloe lady just a minute ago, which sparked her curiosity. The kid is convinced she's found royalty and asks if they're actually a prince and princess traveling together. Shinn starts to freak out and tries to shut the conversation down before it gets any more complicated. A village boy named Cedrin isn't buying the princess story at all. He tells the others there's no way they're royalty because nobles would never stay in a rundown, crappy inn like the one in town. The little village girl gets annoyed with him and snaps, asking what his problem is. She ignores Cedrin's logic and focuses back on Chloe and Shinn, telling them they both look wonderful. She's convinced they look exactly like the beautiful people she's seen in her picture books. The girl gets even more worked up, with stars in her eyes, looking for confirmation that she's right about them. Chloe realizes they're in a tight spot and decides to just lean into the lie. She acts all awkward and says it looks like the kids have finally figured them out. To sell the act, Chloe grabs Shinn and pulls him close, putting on a show. She tells the kids that she's actually on a secret, incognito date with the prince. Shinn is absolutely dying inside. He can't believe the lie she just told and just stands there looking totally drained and speechless. The little girl is completely sold on the romance and shouts about how she knew it all along. Cedrin, on the other hand, still thinks the whole thing sounds incredibly fake. Chloe gets annoyed with the kid's skepticism and leans in close to him. She calls him a brat and jokes that if she were actually a witch instead of a princess, she'd eat him up on the spot. She starts teasing Cedrin by messing with him, causing the girl to squeal while Cedrin tries to get her to knock it off. As Chloe laughs and enjoys her time with the kids, Shinn watches her from the side. He's never seen this side of her before and thinks to himself that he didn't even know she was capable of making such a happy face. Suddenly, a loud voice cuts through their conversation as a woman calls out to the children. The woman, Heidi, tells the kids to stop bothering the guests. Cedrin recognizes her immediately and calls out to her as she rests a hand on the little girl's head. Heidi apologizes to Chloe for the kids being a handful and making her babysit. Chloe just waves it off and tells her it's really no problem because she's actually having a great time playing with them. Heidi explains that these children were actually taken in from an orphanage. She admits that between the work of running the inn and keeping things moving, she hasn't been able to give them as much attention as she'd like. Chloe takes a second to think about what the landlady just said. She looks pretty thoughtful as she processes the situation the kids and the inn are in. Just then, something clicks for Chloe and she gets a determined look in her eye. She calls out to Heidi to get her attention. Chloe suggests that as a way to say thanks for letting them stay at the inn, she and Shinn should help out with the chores and the daily work around the place. The suggestion catches everyone off guard. Heidi looks confused, while Shinn is completely blindsided by the idea, clearly not expecting to be signed up for manual labor at a village inn. Heidi tells Chloe she appreciates the offer, but she can't actually afford to pay them a real salary. She also points out that the area is getting dangerous with all the rough adventurers coming for the dungeon, so it might not be the best environment for them to be working in. Chloe tells the landlady that simply being allowed to stay at the inn is more than enough for her. She explains that after talking things over with her brother the night before, she realized that a place like this village is really the only refuge they have left right now. To show how serious she is about the offer, Chloe bows deeply and asks Heidi if she'll please let them work at the inn. Heidi takes a second to think it over and says she understands the situation they're in. She gives Chloe a smile and says she'll take her up on that offer and let them help out, which completely catches Shinn off guard in the background. Chloe is absolutely thrilled and thanks the landlady, telling her she's looking forward to working there. Just after that, Shinn calls out to Chloe using her nickname, Chaco, to get her attention. He pulls her aside and frantically whispers, asking if a lady like her can even handle physical labor. Chloe isn't bothered by the question and says they won't really know until she gives it a try. Shinn doesn't let it go and asks what happened to their original goal of heading to a monastery. Chloe gets a little serious and admits that staying here is a much better option than being thrown into a monastery all by herself. Chloe gives Shinn a bright smile and tells him that things are just more fun when he's around. Because of that, she asks if he'll stick by her side just a little longer. Shinn is clearly caught off guard by her honesty. He grips his sleeve tightly and trails off, unable to find the right words to respond to her request. He eventually composes himself and tells her that staying with her is only natural since he's her servant. Chloe just laughs at his stiff reaction and thanks him. Looking away with a slight blush, Shinn realizes he's in over his head. He thinks to himself that Chloe has really been messing with his composure lately. Later that day, the sun is high over the village as things settle down around the inn and the nearby well. Shinn goes to check on Chloe and pulls open the door to her room to see if she's finished getting ready. He starts to call out her nickname to see if she's set, but he stops dead in his tracks. He's so shocked by what he sees that he immediately reverts to calling her my lady. Shinn completely loses it and frantically asks what in the world happened to her hair. Chloe calmly runs her fingers through her new long, light-colored locks. She tells him not to worry and explains that the landlady was kind enough to lend her a wig. She strikes a pose and reminds Shinn that she was the saint and the prince's fiancée, so there's a chance people might recognize her. She figures a disguise is the best way to keep things low-key and avoid any unwanted trouble while they're working. Shinn takes a second to process everything and realizes why Chloe is wearing the wig. He says he understands the situation now. Shinn looks at her and wonders if a purple wig would have been better so they could actually look like Sibling. Chloe isn't worried about it though and tells him she thinks she looks good either way. Chloe gets pumped up and says they should get moving. She tells Shinn they need to work hard to show their appreciation for the landlady helping them out. Shinn is still a bit skeptical about the whole plan. He asks what she even plans on doing for work, pointing out that her fancy education at the Holy Church probably isn't going to be very useful in a place like this. Chloe doesn't let his doubt get to her. She just tells him to wait and see what she can do. As they head into the main area of the inn, Shinn watches her put on an apron. He says he's really not sure if this is going to turn out okay. Turns out Shinn had nothing to worry about. He stands there completely stunned as he watches Chloe work the kitchen. She's flipping food in a frying pan like a professional chef, and the dishes she's putting out look incredible. In the next scene, the inn is absolutely packed. Chloe is running around serving customers and keeping everyone happy, and the whole place is busier than it's ever been. Shinn watches her from the sidelines, totally caught off guard. He admits to himself that he had no clue Chloe was actually capable of cooking or even talking to customers like this. Chloe notices him watching and gives him a confident look. She tells him she's decent enough at this kind of work, acting like her impressive skills are no big deal. Shinn is standing in the kitchen, completely baffled by how well things are going. He remembers Chloe being absolutely hopeless at housework, so he's wondering when she actually picked up these skills. Chloe isn't really enjoying the repetitive stuff though. She asks Shinn if there are any more annoying steps left and tells him she's bored, so he should just take over and finish the rest. Out in the dining area, Chloe is a total professional. She smiles at a customer and says she's happy he enjoyed the meal after he tells her the food was great. Shinn watches her from a distance, thinking she looks like a totally different person when she's putting on the charm for the guests. An adventurer sitting at one of the tables takes notice of her. He comments that she's a new face he hasn't seen around the inn before. The guy asks if she's the new girl, and Chloe gives him a bright, polite response. She confirms she just started today and tells him she looks forward to serving them. The adventurer's vibe shifts as he gets a closer look at her. He looks her up and down and says he's pretty surprised to see such a cute girl working in a rough spot like this. He decides to push his luck and gives her a suggestive smile. He leans in and asks her if she'd be down to go for a round with him. Chloe doesn't miss a beat. Instead of acting scared, she grabs a fork and slams it deep into the wooden table right in front of him. She keeps a smile on her face, but it's definitely not a friendly one anymore. She tells him very clearly that he must have walked into the wrong kind of shop if that's what he's looking for. The guy immediately realizes he messed with the wrong woman. He starts sweating and waving his hands around, apologizing frantically to try and de-escalate the situation. Watching from the sidelines, Shinn finally relaxes a bit. He sees that even with the new look and the hard work, her sharp personality hasn't changed at all. He admits to himself that he was definitely overthinking his concerns about her earlier. Chloe and the maid are both completely wiped out after finishing their first real day of labor. Chloe doesn't hold back and yells out about how exhausted she is. Heidi walks over and tells them they did a great job. She admits she didn't think they'd actually be able to work that hard, but Chloe just smiles and says she's honored to hear that. Heidi tells them they're done for the day. She suggests they just go take it easy and relax until it's time for dinner. Chloe is pretty happy about the early break and thanks her. She and Shinn are both looking way more relaxed now that the shift is over. Chloe turns to Shinn and calls him Big Brother to keep up their act. She suggests they head out for a little walk nearby since they have some free time. Shinn's a bit surprised because he figured she'd want to go straight to her room to rest. Chloe tells him that seeing all this greenery is actually really refreshing compared to the holy capital they're used to. While they're walking, Chloe suddenly stops and looks at something in the trees. Shinn notices she's acting strange and asks if something is up. She reaches out into thin air and a magical ripple appears under her hand. She can feel something is off with the atmosphere. Looking closely at the barrier, Chloe sees it's actually starting to crack. She points out that the seal in this area is getting weak, and she can feel the miasma getting a lot stronger. She looks pretty concerned as she explains the danger to Shinn. She tells him that with the barrier in this state, it's weak enough that small monsters might start slipping through. Chloe looks around at the deserted buildings nearby. She points out that since they're so deep in the mountains and the place is abandoned, the official barrier maintenance hasn't reached this far out. She explains that leaving it like this is actually pretty dangerous since there's an upper-level dungeon in the area. Shinn listens and says he gets the situation now. Shinn suggests that they should just report the issue to the Holy Church so Momo can come by and fix the seal. Mentioning Momo's name is a huge mistake. Chloe gets visibly annoyed and asks why he's even bringing up that woman's name. Shinn realizes he just stepped on a major landmine and knows Chloe is about to be furious. Chloe lets out a sigh and tries to calm down. She tells Shinn that his idea probably wouldn't work anyway, which catches him off guard. Moving on, she explains that while Momo is the current saint, she's still way too inexperienced to manage her own mana properly. She notes that if someone like Momo tried to help and accidentally wandered into the dungeon, it would turn into a total disaster. Shinn asks what she's planning to do about it then. Instead of answering, Chloe just starts walking toward the barrier with a serious look on her face. Chloe decides to handle it herself. She reaches out and summons massive, complex magic circles right in the middle of the air. Looking at the cracks in the barrier, Chloe places her hand directly on the magic seal to start the repairs. Chloe wipes the sweat off her forehead and looks pretty satisfied with her work. She says that should about do it, while the maid stands nearby looking a bit surprised that she actually fixed the barrier. Chloe takes a second to explain the mechanics of the defense system. She points out that the holy stones are special items crafted by the church to hold mana and keep the barrier running to protect the surrounding area. She notes that while she can keep the barrier up manually every day as long as she's around, they really need to get a new holy stone delivered soon to make the protection permanent. The maid looks at her, clearly confused by this sudden change in character. She asks why Chloe is going so far out of her way to do all this. Chloe doesn't get defensive, she just looks back with a calm, steady expression. As they both look out toward the horizon, Chloe simply says she's just helping people out. The maid starts overthinking things. She wonders if Chloe realized the barrier was failing all on her own, and more importantly, if she's actually doing this because she's worried about Momo. Chloe notices the maid is lost in thought and asks why she's making such a weird face. The maid jumps a little, getting caught off guard by the question. The maid tries to laugh it off but stays honest. She tells Chloe that when she thinks about how Chloe used to act toward Momo. Moving on, the maid recalls how Chloe used to lose it, calling Momo a thieving cat and shouting about how she'd never trust someone like her to be a saint. The maid finishes her thought, asking Chloe if those aren't the exact types of insults she'd usually be throwing around instead of helping out. Chloe starts laughing and tells the maid that her impression doesn't look like her at all. She asks if that was even supposed to be an imitation of her, finding the whole thing pretty funny. Chloe gets a bit more serious and looks down, explaining that after enough time passed, she finally managed to get her head on straight and let go of all that bitterness. She thinks back to her time at the academy, remembering how she used to watch Prince Rodrio and Momo together from a distance. She admits that back then, the prince was the only thing she ever thought about. The memories of her behavior are pretty cringeworthy. She remembers screaming at Momo, telling her to get her filthy hands off the prince while everyone watched. It got even worse when she tried to physically grab the prince to pull him away, but Rodrio just barked at her to let go and stay away from him. The prince looked at her with total disgust, and Chloe remembers how much that look used to destroy her, leaving her standing there in shock. Looking back, she realizes that no matter how much she cried or made a scene, she was never going to win the prince over. His heart was never going to be hers. Chloe admits that she really messed up by treating Momo like an enemy and doing so many terrible things to her just because she was jealous. Moving on, Chloe says things are different now. She is shown out in the garden with her butler, Shinn, looking a lot more at peace than she ever was at the academy. Chloe flashes a huge, bright smile and tells Shinn that she wants to focus on new things. She says she is determined to find a way to live her life freely from now on. Shinn looks at her, totally stunned by how much she has changed. The scene shifts back to the capital palace where Prince Rodrio is staying. While he's stuck inside, Chloe is elsewhere looking happier than ever, busy working outside in her apron. Inside the palace, Rodrio is sitting by himself, clearly bothered by his last encounter with Chloe. He repeats her words about wanting to start something new, and it's obvious that her change in attitude is really getting to him. He starts thinking back to how things used to be between them. He remembers how Chloe was always obsessed with him and would look at him with total adoration, even when he treated her like garbage. He also recalls the moments where she'd break down and cry, desperate for his attention. Rodrio clenches his fist over his heart, feeling a sudden pang of frustration. He can't wrap his head around the fact that she might actually be over him, asking himself if he really doesn't matter to her anymore. He looks down, wondering what this weird feeling in his chest is supposed to be. As he tries to figure it out, he can't stop picturing the bright, genuine smile Chloe gave him when they last spoke. Moving on, Rodrio begins to remember how everything started. He thinks back to when he was just a young kid first learning about his future. He remembers the first time he saw Chloe as a child. She was peeking through a set of large doors looking shy. He thought her pitch-black hair and dark eyes were incredibly rare and interesting. Turns out, Chloe was the girl who had been officially picked to be the next saint candidate. Because of that title, she was also the one chosen to be his future fiancée. In the next scene, a young Rodrio walks up to her and asks if she's the girl named Chloe. The poor girl is absolutely terrified, shaking and stuttering while she tries to answer him. Rodrio realizes he's scaring her and apologizes for the rough start. He keeps it formal and introduces himself as Rodrio Ben and Califlia, the first prince of the kingdom. Chloe is totally overwhelmed by the prince's presence, her head spinning as she tries to find the right words to say. She panics and starts blurting out her name and family title, introducing herself as the daughter of Prime Minister Brachiosanant. She turns bright red, hiding her face because she's so embarrassed that she messed up the introduction she spent so long practicing. Rodrio just stands there watching while Chloe holds her head in her hands, wishing she could disappear from the embarrassment. But then Rodrio starts laughing, telling her she's a real hard worker for practicing her introduction just to meet him. Chloe is caught off guard, and her heart skips a beat seeing him look so happy. Rodrio leans in with a bit of a smirk and tells her that if she's always this timid, she's going to have a hard time standing in front of the people as his princess. Chloe can barely process what he's saying, stumbling over her words in response. He goes on to say that becoming his princess depends on her studying hard and being officially recognized as the saint. Chloe clutches her hands together, the idea of actually being Rodrio's princess finally sinking in and making her heart race. She looks at him with total determination and a huge smile, promising that she'll work her hardest to become a great saint so she can stay by his side. The two of them stand there as kids, and it's clear that this was the moment Chloe found her reason to keep pushing forward. Back in the flashback, young Rodrio looks at Chloe and tells her that her determined attitude is exactly what he wants to see from his future princess. He reaches out and tells her that since they're close now, she should start calling him Benny, just like his inner circle does. Chloe is absolutely glowing with happiness as they hold hands, and she excitedly promises to call him Lord Benny from then on. The scene shifts to the present day where Rodrio is sitting on his bed in his pajamas, looking pretty tired after just waking up from that nostalgic dream. He thinks back to the kids in his dream and realizes that there actually was a time when Chloe was a nice, happy person. But as he looks at a memory of her walking away, he notes that there isn't a single trace of that girl left, and he wonders exactly when her personality turned so sour. Just then, Momo Palette comes running up to him with a huge smile, shouting out a bright good morning and calling him by his nickname, Benny. Rodrio says good morning back to Momo, but he seems a little caught off guard to see that Dai Nebel is hanging out with her as well. He gives Momo a friendly pat on the head, telling her she seems like she's got a lot of energy today. Momo blushes and looks a bit surprised, asking if she really comes across as being that energetic this early in the morning. Momo Palette is having a rough morning and lets everyone know about it. She complains that being forced to wake up early and head straight to the church for a massive cleaning session is completely exhausting. She keeps venting to Rodrio, comparing the nagging priests to a bunch of overbearing mothers-in-law who do nothing but find fault with her work. Rodrio tries to smooth things over and tells her that the priests aren't trying to be mean. He explains they're just really focused on making sure she turns into a proper saint, so he asks her to try and forgive them. As they talk, Rodrio starts to have some second thoughts. He wonders to himself if Momo was always this vocal and complainy. Momo pouts and admits that while the people at the church can be nice sometimes, it doesn't change how she feels. She makes it pretty clear she's over it, muttering about how both her saint training and her lessons on how to be a queen are just a huge pain. Moving on, Momo switches topics and asks Rodrio about Chloe. She mentions hearing that he was officially ordered to keep an eye on the exiled girl. Rodrio doesn't make a big deal out of it and simply confirms that the rumors are true. Momo looks a bit concerned and asks if Chloe happened to say anything about her specifically while he was watching her. Rodrio thinks about it and tells her there wasn't anything worth mentioning. He points out that Chloe knows she's being watched, so she's likely being careful not to say anything stupid. Momo looks pretty down as she admits that she's convinced Chloe hates her. She tells Rodrio that just thinking about it makes her really scared. Rodrio listens and realizes that Momo is clearly stressed out. He notes that her mental state is a mess because of everything going on with Chloe. He looks at her and thinks about how much of a hard time she's having. He decides right then that he's the one who needs to step up and protect her. Just then, Dai Nebel jumps in and puts his arm around Momo with a big grin. He tells her not to worry because they've both got her back if anything goes wrong. Rodrio isn't feeling the physical contact and tells Dai to stop being so touchy. Dai just laughs it off and says it's just friendly skinship, and Momo backs him up by saying they're all just friends. The conversation gets cut short by the sound of bells ringing in the background. Dai realizes the time and tells Momo she needs to get going. Momo pouts a bit since she wanted to keep hanging out and talking. Dai tells her it's a bummer, but she doesn't really have a choice. Before she leaves, Momo suddenly remembers something and hands them a bag. She smiles brightly and tells the guys they should all share the food she brought. She gives a quick wave and shouts that she's heading out, running off to start her day. Once she's gone, Rodrio takes a curious look inside the bag. Dai leans in as well, asking him what she actually gave them. Dai looks into the bag Momo left behind and gets pretty hyped when he sees their cookies. He wonders if she actually made them herself, and Rodrio looks over, saying that's probably exactly what happened. Rodrio starts eating one of the cookies, and thinks to himself that if the academy work is that stressful, he'd rather Momo just use her free time to get some rest. He mentions out loud that she really is a good girl for thinking of them, but he can't shake the feeling that something is off. He looks at Dai and asks if he thinks Momo is actually being bullied in secret, since she's been looking so worn out lately. Rodrio wonders if maybe the priests are the ones giving her a hard time. Dai tells him there's no way that's it, explaining that the training curriculum is likely the same as it was back when Chloe was attending. Dai reminds him that Momo was a commoner until just recently, so she's basically starting from zero. He points out that she has to learn every single basic manner and social rule from scratch, which is why she's got so much on her plate. Dai thinks it's impressive because Momo manages to learn things twice as fast as anyone else. Rodrio listens and has to admit that he's got a point there. Rodrio gets a bit more serious and notes that being a queen isn't just about standing by the king and looking happy. He says she has to act as a proper representative of the entire country at all times. Thinking about those royal expectations triggers a memory for him. He thinks back to when they were younger and remembers how Chloe was always so solid and composed, even as a kid. We see a memory of her perfectly practicing her curtsy in front of her instructors. He remembers them at social events where Chloe would navigate the room with ease. Looking back, he wonders if she was actually that capable or if she was just really good at putting on a front and acting the part. Rodrio looks down at the crime scene, staring at the broken bottle and the mess on the floor. He starts to doubt the obvious story, wondering why Chloe would have left such clear evidence of her bullying Momo if she was actually as calculated as everyone thought. In the village, Chloe is working hard under her alias Chaco. Someone calls out to her, asking if she can take care of cleaning the toilets once she's finished with her current task. Chloe turns back with a smile and tells them she's on it. The maid catches up to her, looking totally stressed out. She almost slips up and calls her my lady before quickly correcting herself to Chaco. Chloe stays calm and asks what's got her so worked up. The maid is practically shaking, looking at Chloe with a lot of concern. She asks Chloe if she's really doing all right with how things are going, clearly struggling to see her mistress in this position. She gets even more heated, asking Chloe if it's really okay for her to be stuck with all the gross jobs like cleaning out the chicken coop and the toilets. She thinks Chloe is being forced into doing all the dirty work. Chloe just looks at her and tells her she's overthinking the whole thing. She explains that cleaning was actually part of her training back at the academy anyway, so it's not a big deal to her. Just then, Heidi walks up behind them with a smile and asks if there's some kind of problem. The maid freaks out and quickly tells her that everything is totally fine, while Heidi tells them to get back to it. Heidi tells Chloe she's counting on her to get the job done. Chloe gives her a bright, genuine smile and promises to handle everything. Later, while Chloe is walking through the grass with a broom and a bag of trash, she hears a voice calling out to her. It's the village kids, Cedrin and the little girl. They run up to her looking pretty excited and ask if she wants to come play with them. Chloe apologizes to the kids, telling them she still has chores to wrap up and promises to play with them once she's finished. The little girl isn't having it though and starts complaining about having to wait. Just as Chloe thinks things are settled, she notices Cedrin pulling something out. It turns out to be a toy water gun, and Chloe asks him what he's doing with such a suspicious-looking object. Before she can get an answer, Cedrin blasts her right in the face with a stream of water. He starts laughing hysterically, shouting that he's finally going to take down the evil witch. Chloe stands there completely frozen. Water drips down her face and clothes while she processes the fact that she just got soaked by a little kid. She finally snaps and starts chasing after the kids, yelling at Cedrin to wait up and calling him a little brat. The kids just laugh and keep running, making a game out of the whole thing. As they run through the village, the little girl spots a familiar face and screams out for her big brother to help. The kids run right up to a young man who turns out to be the adventurer from the inn. Chloe doesn't slow down, pointing aggressively at Cedrin and yelling for the man to catch him. The adventurer is totally lost, wondering what's going on. Chloe doesn't give him time to think, demanding that he stop Cedrin no matter what it takes. The adventurer follows through and ends up giving the kid a good smack. Cedrin ends up with a massive bump on his head and starts crying from the pain while the adventurer calmly asks what the kid even did to deserve this. Chloe explains that the little brat decided to ambush her with a water gun for no reason. The adventurer keeps a firm hold on Cedrin while the boy struggles and yells for him to let go. Cedrin sticks his tongue out at Shinn and mocks him, calling him a total sister complex. Shinn just looks down, clearly getting tired of the kid's attitude after getting soaked. Shinn picks Cedrin up by the back of his shirt while the kid flails around. He looks over at Chloe and asks her what they should do with him, even suggesting they just flush the brat down the toilet. Chloe tells Shinn he's making too much of a scene. She says it was all just a game and tells him to drop it and leave the kid alone. Cedrin goes quiet, looking a bit guilty now. Chloe mentions that since she's covered in mud and water, she's going to catch a cold and definitely can't work in the kitchen looking like this. Chloe grabs Cedrin and casually announces that they're going to go take a shower together. Both Shinn and Cedrin completely lose it, with the kid looking especially shocked by the suggestion. The guys are both panicking, asking her if they're really supposed to go in at the same time. Chloe doesn't see the big deal and just tells them that's exactly what's happening. Moving on, Chloe looks over at Shinn and asks if he wants to hop in with them too. Shinn just gives her a flat look, asking her to please stop messing with him. Chloe starts walking off with the kid, waving her hand and laughing. She tells Shinn she's just joking around and says they'll be back in a bit. Shinn stands there by himself, looking pretty frustrated. He sighs and wonders if Chloe actually has any sense of shame or if she's just like this all the time. Later on, Cedrin comes out with a towel around his neck. He's blushing like crazy and literally steaming from the heat, looking like the whole experience was way too much for him to handle. Chloe and the maid are having a good laugh at Cedrin's expense. Chloe says he's acting like a timid little cat that just got brought to a new home, and the maid laughs along, suggesting that maybe hanging out with a lively girl was just way too much for the kid to handle. Cedrin is just sitting there with his face turning bright red. Chloe keeps teasing him and starts babying him, saying she didn't realize he had such a cute side. Cedrin isn't having it at all and yells at her to stop touching him, even calling her a pervert while he tries to get away from her. Chloe seems a little taken aback by the kid's outburst. While back in the room, Shinn just watches the whole scene with a flat, exhausted expression. The inn is absolutely packed with people today. Someone points out how busy the place is, and turns out it's because a high-level guild subjugation team just got back from a job, and they're all hanging out there. Chloe notices the crowd and tells the maid to check out the guys sitting over at one of the tables. As she looks over, Chloe's eyes go wide and she completely freezes. She can't believe what she's seeing and lets out a tiny gasp of shock. She stares at one of the guys at the table, realizing that it's actually Rock Glinda. Right then, Rock Glinda looks up and their eyes lock across the room. There's instant tension between them as they realize they've spotted each other. Without saying a word to his buddy, Rock Glinda gets up from the table and starts walking straight over to where Chloe is standing. He gets right in her face, leaning in close to ask her what her deal is and if she actually knows who he is. Chloe is completely cornered and just lets out a scared little noise. Chloe is completely flustered, stammering and unable to get a full sentence out as she faces Rock Glinda. He just stands there staring her down while she struggles to find her words. Rock doesn't hold back and calls her a beauty, then asks her straight up how much it would cost for her to let him hold her. Chloe just stares at him, totally stunned by how blunt he's being. The maid is standing nearby and lets out a confused sound, having a hard time processing the fact that he just proposed something like that. Chloe's eyes go wide as the shock of his words really sinks in. Rock leans in even closer, telling her that a beautiful girl like her has no business working in a place this dusty. He's convinced there's a story behind it and asks her one more time what her price is. Chloe goes quiet and casts a shadow over her face, but the maid has seen enough. She loses it and starts pointing her finger, yelling at Rock for having the nerve to talk to a noble lady in such a disrespectful way. Rock seems confused by the maid's outburst and asks what she's talking about, but before he can react, Chloe reaches out. She grabs hold of his clothes, surprising him. In a sudden burst of confidence, Chloe yanks Rock toward her by his collar, forcing him to look her right in the eyes. The maid can only watch in total silence, completely shocked by Chloe's sudden aggression. The move actually works on Rock, and he ends up blushing as Chloe stays right in his face. With tears starting to well up, Chloe starts shouting at him. She tells him he's got it all wrong and insists that the Rock she knows would never say something so horrible. Rock just stares at her, looking genuinely taken aback by how emotional she's getting. Looking back, there's a memory of the two of them in a much more peaceful setting. Rock is sitting in a field of flowers with Chloe standing right behind him, making it clear that their history goes way back. A quick look into the past shows that Chloe and Rock have known each other since they were kids. Back in the present, Rock is a blushing mess, wondering if they've just been on completely different pages this whole time. Chloe is still visibly upset, her hand shaking as she holds onto him. Chloe goes off on him, saying there's no way the Rock she knows would ever say something so gross. She finishes her rant by telling him his behavior is just flat out impossible. Rock is totally overwhelmed and tells her to wait a minute. He looks like he can't believe she's actually crying and getting this emotional over his bluntness. He asks her what she actually knows about him to be talking like this. Chloe stops in her tracks, looking like the question really hit home. She starts to get shy and fumbles with her words, trying to get her thoughts together. Chloe points out that he's a big-shot adventurer with a huge reputation for clearing high-level dungeons. She asks him if he isn't actually that same famous Rock Glinda everyone talks about. She tells him that people look up to adventurers and see them as a dream, and she didn't want her version of that dream to be crushed. Rock is visibly flattered by this, looking a bit sparkly and surprised. Rock looks away with a shy smile and admits she's making him blush. He finally owns up to it and says he's sorry for being out of line and making her mad. While they're talking, Shinn Purpleton suddenly appears and steps right in front of Chloe to shield her. Chloe looks up, surprised to see her butler stepping in so suddenly. Rock looks at the new guy and asks who he is. Shinn stays calm and introduces himself as Chloe's brother to keep her safe and maintain their cover. Shinn keeps the act going, introducing himself as the older brother and Chloe as his little sister Choco. He gives a polite greeting to wrap things up. Rock is clearly thrown off by the sudden shift in the mood, but he manages to awkwardly mutter back a nice to meet you. Shinn doesn't waste any time and says the shop is starting to get crowded, so they need to get back and start their preparation. Chloe is caught off guard by how fast he's moving. As they start walking away, Rock reaches out and tries to get their attention, but they don't stop. Shinn drops the polite act for a split second, shooting Rock a look of pure hatred while thinking about how dare he touch Chloe. He maintains his voice though, saying he has things to do and excuses himself. Rock is left standing there totally stunned, unable to process the terrifying vibe he just got from the brother. As they walk away, Chloe looks up at Shinn and asks if he's actually mad about something. Shinn just keeps his customer service smile on and asks her what she's talking about. In the next scene, Rock is walking off by himself, feeling awkward and scratching his neck, when someone suddenly calls his name. A woman from his group grabs him by the shoulder and tells him to come over to the side for a talk. She calls him a total moron and points out that he's clearly not cut out for hitting on girls. Rock just stares at the ground, looking completely defeated. The adventurer is left standing there totally confused, thinking it's weird because usually girls are into it when he hits on them. He remembers all the times he's successfully picked up girls before, while Chloe and Shinn walk away. Chloe can't help but think her brother is actually pretty terrifying when he's like this. Heidi isn't letting him off the hook though. She gets right in his face and tells him that the way he was acting only works in certain special shops. She yells that it's definitely not okay to talk to girls like that out in public. She keeps laying into him, saying he's really messed up and asking if he's for real. The adventurer looks like a kicked puppy, sitting there small and dejected while he realizes how badly he blew it. Just then, Chloe and Shinn catch up to the group. The maid bows and apologizes to Heidi for making her wait so long. Chloe notices the heavy atmosphere and asks if they were in the middle of something important. The adventurer looks up and calls out to Chloe, using the fake name Shinn gave her, Choco. Before anyone can say anything else, the guy suddenly bows as low as he can. He says he's incredibly sorry for the awful things he said to her earlier. Chloe is completely stunned by the sudden turn in his attitude and doesn't know how to react. She and the maid both start waving their hands around nervously. Chloe tells him not to worry about it and apologizes back, saying she felt bad for slapping him so suddenly. Heidi decides to finish him off, joking that he was just a virgin trying to act like a player and it totally backfired on him. The adventurer gets all red and tells her to knock it off, while Shinn just watches the whole pathetic display with a look of pure judgment. Rock is still a blushing mess, looking down as he admits he only acted like a jerk because he thought she was cute and wanted to impress her. The confession completely flusters Chloe, and she makes some high-pitched noises before managing to get out a shy thank you. Shinn just stands in the background, watching the whole awkward interaction with his usual calm face. Rock decides to start over properly. He adjusts his gloves and introduces himself as Rock Glinda, telling her it's good to meet her. Chloe smiles and says it's nice to meet him too, and Rock gives a quick nod to acknowledge her. As they talk, Chloe's attention is caught by Rock's hand. She notices the thick sword calluses and points them out. Rock looks at his own hand, sounding a bit confused as he asks if having calluses like that is really such a rare thing to see. Chloe explains that while nobles definitely train, she thinks the way an adventurer's muscles and hands develop is totally different and interesting. She gets a bit too excited and leans in close, asking Rock if she can take a much closer look at him. Chloe has literal stars in her eyes as she stares, which sends Rock into a total panic. He's blushing even harder now and starts stammering, wondering what she's even doing. Heidi sees the whole thing and starts laughing, teasing Rock about the fact that he's actually blushing. Rock loses it and yells at her to shut up, clearly embarrassed that he's being called out. Heidi keeps the teasing going by mentioning how much Rock seems to like Chloe, then asks how his famous childhood friend would feel about that. Rock just looks away, turning bright red and pulling on his scarf. Chloe catches on to the mention of a childhood friend and repeats the words, sounding curious about who Rock might be close to. Heidi continues the story, saying that when Rock first showed up at the inn, he couldn't stop talking about this girl. She describes her as a cute sister type who was really friendly with everyone, which makes Rock lose it and beg Heidi to stop making fun of him. The mood shifts as Rock looks down, his expression becoming a bit more serious. He admits that he actually hasn't been in touch with that girl for a long time now. He explains that he used to send her letters, but ever since she left for the Holy Capital, he hasn't heard a single word back. It's clear that the lack of contact has been weighing on him. Chloe finds this information pretty strange. She thinks to herself that you don't usually see adventurers in such remote areas having connections to people living in the Holy Capital. In a quiet moment, Rock just wonders to himself if she's out there doing all right. Just then, Rock mentions the name Momo, and Chloe's reaction is instant. She lunges forward and clamps her hand over Shinn's mouth before he can say anything, leaving him totally shocked by the sudden move. Shinn tries to mumble through her fingers, wondering why Momo's name is being mentioned in a place like this, but Chloe isn't having it. She tells him he needs to calm down and stay quiet so they don't get caught. Moving on, Rock notices the awkward vibe and laughs it off, apologizing for bringing up the past. He tells them his old stories are probably boring to listen to anyway. Heidi decides that's enough chatting for one session and tells everyone they need to get back to work. Rock is totally on board and says he's ready to get started. As they head off, Rock mentions that he helps out at the inn whenever he isn't busy with a subjugation job. Chloe seems a bit surprised by this and asks if he actually helps run the place. Even though Chloe is acting all cheerful and laughing on the outside, she's secretly clenching her fist. She can't help but wonder who Rock Glinda really is and what he's doing there. Later on, while Chloe is busy washing dishes in the kitchen, Shinn walks in and calls out to her. Chloe looks over at him and asks what's up, noticing that he looks like he has something on his mind. Shinn gets straight to the point and asks her who that Rock guy is supposed to be. Chloe just brushes it off, telling him that if he was so curious, he should have just asked the guy himself when they were talking. Shinn explains that he couldn't do that because it might make Rock start asking questions about their own backgrounds, which would be bad news. Chloe realizes he's right and agrees with his logic. She takes a second to think, pulling up the information she has on that name. She recalls the details about Rock Glinda, picturing him in his full adventurer gear. It turns out he's actually the adopted son of Count Glinda from the neighboring kingdom. On top of that, he's a well-known adventurer who carries the nickname Glinda of the Twin Swords. Chloe continues detailing what she knows about Rock, explaining that he's famous for his speed with those twin swords. He's so fast that his targets don't even know they've been hit until after the fight is already over. Even though he's on the smaller side compared to other top adventurers, his agility and hand-to-hand combat skills are apparently on a whole different level. While she talks about him, Chloe gets a bit carried away in her own head. She thinks about how cool he looks in a fight, but then switches to thinking about how his smile makes him look like a lost puppy. She can't help but think the guy is totally adorable. Shinn looks at her, pretty surprised that she has all this detailed info on a random adventurer. He tells her she sure knows a lot about someone like that. She plays it off casually, telling Shinn that she just happened to come across all this information while she was digging through old documents and records back in the day. Shinn isn't buying it though. He points out that she knew exactly who Rock was the second she saw him. He asks her how she was able to recognize him instantly just from reading some old text. Chloe tries to cover her tracks by saying there was a photo included with the records. She explains that back when she was being trained to be a queen, she had to research every famous person in the kingdom, so this was just part of her old studies. Shinn doesn't say a word and just gives her a long, skeptical look. Chloe starts to feel the pressure, thinking about how he's really digging into this. Suddenly, something clicks for her. She takes a good look at Shinn's face as a new theory pops into her head. She leans in with a playful smirk and tells Shinn she's got him figured out. She asks him if the real reason he's being so pushy is because he's actually just jealous of Rock. Shinn asks Chloe why she would even think he was jealous. Chloe just watches him with a look that suggests she thinks she's hit a nerve. The conversation takes a sharp turn when the maid suddenly pipes up, explaining that Rock is actually Momo's childhood friend. Chloe is caught completely off guard by the news. Rock is just as shocked to hear them mention Momo. He immediately loses his cool and demands to know if they actually know her. Chloe realizes she's accidentally opened a huge can of worms. The whole group stands there in a bit of an awkward silence as the name, Rock, hangs in the air and the weight of the connection sinks in. Rock gets right in their faces, sounding pretty desperate as he confirms Momo is his childhood friend and begs them to tell him every detail they know about her current situation. Chloe starts to freak out internally, thinking about how much she just messed up by letting that info slip. She takes a second to catch her breath and let out a long sigh. She tells Rock he needs to settle down before they discuss anything further. Once everyone is seated, Rock asks if their knowledge of Momo means they've traveled all the way from the holy capital. Chloe doesn't see much point in lying and confirms that they did. Rock leans in, asking if they have any idea what Momo is actually doing with herself lately. Chloe breaks the news to him, explaining that Momo was appointed as the true saint. She mentions that Momo was brought in specifically to replace the former saint, who was none other than Chloe herself. Chloe gives a small smile as she thinks about the situation. She says that at this rate, Momo will probably just end up becoming Prince Rodrio's queen. Shinn watches her closely, looking a bit concerned. He asks her if she's already convinced herself that she can't ever go back to the holy capital. The room goes quiet for a second while Rock takes it all in. He says he finally gets what's going on with Momo. Rock starts to relax a bit and even laughs, pointing out how Momo is such a tomboy and doesn't know the first thing about the world. He says he honestly can't even picture her acting like a saint. Rock gets curious and asks if her becoming queen means she's actually in love with the prince. Chloe looks away, admitting she doesn't really know how Momo feels, but she knows for a fact the prince was totally obsessed with her. Rock laughs it off, saying the prince at least has a good-looking face. He looks a lot more relaxed now and says he's just glad to know she's doing well for herself out there. The clock on the wall shows it's getting really late. Rock suddenly loses it and jumps up, realizing the landlady is probably waiting for him and he's late. He starts heading for the door but stops to wave goodbye. He tells them he's gotta go for now and thanks them for sharing all that info about Momo. Outside, the moon is high in the sky. Rock calls out a final goodnight and says he'll catch them again tomorrow. Once Rock is gone, the room falls back into a quiet, heavy silence. Chloe and Shinn just sit there together, left with their own thoughts as the night goes on. Chloe looks away and mentions how she knew it. It turns out Rock is also into Momo. Shinn is caught off guard by the comment and asks what she's talking about. While Shinn stares at her, Chloe keeps her thoughts to herself. She doesn't think Rock actually likes Momo that way. To her, they just looked like normal friends. Chloe goes on to explain that everyone seems to be in love with Momo. She lists off Prince Rodrio and even her brother Dark as people who have fallen for her. The conversation takes a sharp turn when Chloe asks Shinn if he's in the same boat. Shinn doesn't answer right away, but his hand grips the bedsheet tight as he quietly addresses her as my lady. Shinn finally speaks up, telling her that he isn't sure what's going on in her head, but there's one thing he needs to set straight. Chloe looks at him, completely confused, and asks what he means by that. Shinn looks her in the eye and brings up how she accused him of being jealous of Rock earlier. He admits that she was actually right about that part. However, he quickly follows up by saying his jealousy has absolutely nothing to do with Momo. Shinn leans in close to her, making his point clear. He explains that the only reason he was annoyed was because he didn't like how overly familiar Rock was acting toward her. Chloe is left totally stunned. She stares back at him, unable to do anything but make a small sound of surprise as the weight of his words hits her. Chloe is completely floored by what Shinn just said. She can't even look at him properly and starts to ask what he means by that, but she's so flustered she can barely finish the sentence. She calls out his name, trying to get a read on the situation, but the mood is too heavy. Shinn suddenly looks away, breaking the tension by turning his back on her. Shinn's tone shifts as he regains his composure. He apologizes for overstepping and being too bold, then tells her to just forget everything he just admitted to. Before Chloe can even respond, Shinn heads out and slams the door behind him. She's left sitting alone on the bed with her face burning red, totally stunned by the whole encounter.